Earlier today, I spoke to James Packer. Now, yesterday we were talking to Josh Frydenberg, Tony Abbott's parliamentary secretary, about this road show they're going Japan, Korea, China. A couple of stops in China, selling Australia. I reckon the most powerful political and business delegation to Asia in our history. You've got people like James Packer, Kerry Stokes, some of the Gail Kelly, the leading business people in the country. All the premiers are going up to meet at the weekend. This is a fair income attempt to sell Australia in Asia. James Packer, chairman of Crown, of course. Now, I pre-recorded a discussion with him earlier this morning because he's on the road, but I started by asking about the importance of this free trade agreement we were talking about earlier, cheaper TVs and cars in Australia, but the importance of the free trade agreement that emerged overnight and what it means for Australia.
I think, in and of itself, it's important, and obviously there are benefits for primary producers, and I think there are going to be benefits for consumers over time as tariffs come down. But I think the more important thing is seeing the Australian relationship with Japan continuing to strengthen. And I was fortunate enough to be at a lunch yesterday where Prime Minister Abbott and Prime Minister Abe were there, and a dinner where they were both there. And there's clearly a really strong personal relationship, and I think that's very healthy for Australia. And I think that Prime Minister Abbott's made it very clear that a big part of this trip for him is to make sure that the countries that he's visiting know that Australia is open to business. And I think that that's a great message for Australia, and I think that's why so many people in the business community are supporting the Prime Minister and are up here with him.
So where does the relationship with Japan, where does it take us now? What do we do? What's the next step that can benefit this country?
Well, I think that when you think about business in Japan, a free trade agreement is hopefully going to lower the barriers to let Australian businesses do more in Japan. I'm pausing a little bit, I guess, because our business is in a interesting position up here where Japan is contemplating opening up integrated resorts, and so for our business that's a very specific opportunity.
So this should help.
Generally, for primary producers, opening up of the market is a very good thing, and I think just more multilateral trade generally is always a good thing.
Well, do you think this will help in your attempts to get into the Japanese market?
Oh, I think that the truth is the Japanese Parliament and Diet is going to decide for themselves whether they're going to go down the path of integrated resorts. I think my sense from being up here is that it's more likely than not, a lot more likely than not, that they're going to do that. And I think that the countries that Japan will probably look closely to if they make that decision are Singapore, Australia, and Macau. They're examples in this region where integrated resorts have been introduced.
So that means that Japan is really your next aim, is it, for your own business?
Sorry?
Japan is your next aim for your own business?
Well, I think that's I think it'd be an incredible market to have an opportunity to participate in. So we're going to do our very best to do that. We're in a fortunate position that we've got a lot on already, and a lot to execute on and build and get done. So it's not it's not like if we don't get here, if we don't get there in Japan. We've got nothing to do. But this is the third biggest economy in the world. It's the third biggest economy in the world. It's 110 million people. With it's a very dense population, and they're very affluent people. So, for us, it'd be a really terrific market to try and get into.
I can't remember such a heavy business delegation with yourself and some of the other leaders going on this trip. Why? A busy man like yourself, why do it? Why go to all these dinners and barbecues and lobbying and things? What's the point to it?
I'm a big fan of Tony Abbott. I think he's, I'm a big fan. I'm lucky enough to know him a little bit personally and professionally. And I think, being Prime Minister is obviously is obviously the hardest job, and there's only been 28 prime ministers of Australia, which as you would know, and I think the last thing I'd want to do is speak ill of someone who doesn't have the job anymore. But I do think that the last the governments in between the Howard and the Abbott governments didn't do a great job, in truth, of strengthening ties in our region. And I think that when you go around and lecture people, and I think you'd know who I'm talking about, some people don't take it that well, and especially if you position yourself as a foreign policy expert. I think the truth is that Australia's relationships with China, Japan, India and Indonesia probably all went backwards over the last 5 years. And, Australia's integration into Asia, is, at a macro level, just about the most important thing our government can do. And so I think, Prime Minister Abbott being here and saying we're open for business and we're grateful for business and we want to do more business, bilateral business, I think that that's something that, is very important for Australia. And I think that the business community knows how important it is to get those relationships back on the right track. And I think just watching the personal chemistry between Prime Minister Abe and Prime Minister Abbott, there is these guys have obviously kicked it off really well. And when Prime Minister Abbott gets to China, all of the Australian premiers are joining him, which has never happened before. So again, he's trying to very respectfully and diplomatically show the seriousness of his visit to China and the weight that he places and the import that he places in the relationship with China. So,
now, with respect, it's not like you to be coy, but we're saying Kevin Rudd actually damaged our relations in Asia.
That's my view.
That's extraordinary. I'm not disagreeing with you, but given his reputation for diplomacy and his self-professed understanding of China, and you're quite sure it took a backward step.
That's my personal view, Neil. And again, I wish Kevin Rudd well, but that's my personal view that our relationships in China went backwards, and and Indonesia and India. I think it's. So
Tony Abbott's really trying to make up ground here.
I think so. And that's why so many people are up here supporting him from the business community.
Do you think he's achieved that in Japan? Obviously,
I think
China's
no doubt,
the next challenge.
For Prime Minister Abe to confer upon Australia for the first time, as he did yesterday, the status of a special relationship. I think in political talk, not that I'm an expert in political talk, I think that's that's meant to be a big deal. And I think the Prime Minister was asked to a National Security Council meeting by the Japanese Prime Minister yesterday, which was the first time a foreign leader has ever been invited to a national security briefing in Japan. So, that doesn't just happen if you don't get on well. So, Prime Minister Abbott and Prime Minister Abe and clearly have struck a very good relationship. And Prime Minister Abe is coming to Australia now, I think, in June to address both houses of Parliament. So I think that that the Prime Minister also making Asia very clearly the first big trip he's taken in his Prime Ministership, his big delegation, is again showing that the interaction with Asia is going to be key to Australia's economic future, and where I think again the Prime Minister's right is that it's not about minimising or reducing or throwing away past relationships. Our relationship with America, our relationship with England, all of those things are priceless and should be treasured and maintained and kept. But it doesn't mean that we have to take sides, and it doesn't mean that we don't make new friends.
True. And what about China? What do you hope to achieve in the China leg of this trip?
Well, I think very clearly China has gone from being an economy that was not doing well 30 years ago to now being the second largest economy in the world by GDP. Not on a GDP per capita basis, but obviously there's 1.3 billion people there, and I think my my view is China will be the largest economy in the world in 10 years' time. And so, building bridges with China, must be a smart thing to do. China's an important part of our business. We've got business interests in Macau and even for Crown Melbourne and Crown Perth and Crown Sydney in the future. A large part of our customer base is Chinese citizens who decide to come to Australia for a holiday.
Have you managed to achieve anything about getting them into Australia in an easier fashion?
I think there are two examples that I think I would encourage the government to look at, and again I think Andrew Robb has, as Trade Minister, has done a very good job in getting the Japan FTA to where it is, and he's also the Tourism Minister. But I do think that there are 70 countries now approximately around the world which take online visa applications. Australia accepts online visa applications. We don't from China. In China, if you want to apply for an Australian visa, you have to apply in English. Now, at a very high level, I think we should make it, as easy for a wealthy Chinese citizen to come to Australia as we do for a wealthy American citizen. I don't think the Cold War is still going, and my starting position would be, why would it be any harder for a Chinese citizen to get a visa to visit Australia than it would be for an American citizen to get a visa to visit Australia?
Yep.
And so I don't think that it makes sense that visa application forms in China should be filled out in English, and I don't think that it makes sense that they have to be done through the post. There's a new world out there.
I thank you very much for your time. I know you're busy. Thanks for your time. Good luck on the next lead.
Thanks very much, Neil. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. The Chair of Crown, James Packer. Okay, extraordinary, not extraordinary, but pointed criticism of Kevin Rudd there, and also effectively saying that the way we deal with our visas out of China is racist and unfair. Didn't use the word racist, but that's what he's saying. Talking Melbourne.